We're all part of groups, right? Whether it's a country, a city, or even a fan club. But is that always a good thing? Today, we're diving into group identity, a force that can literally build societies up or tear them completely apart. So let's dig in and find out what really makes the difference. Okay, so where does this all start? Well, it really comes down to a super fundamental human need, the need to belong. I mean, think about it. Our nationality, our city, our favorite sports team, our heritage. We seem to be wired to form groups, but this one simple impulse has incredibly complex consequences. And this is where we hit the central paradox. The exact same instinct that creates trust and cooperation inside a group can also fuel suspicion and conflict with anyone outside of it. I mean, how can one impulse lead to such wildly different results? So the best way to think about this is like a double-edged sword. It's an incredibly powerful tool. It can be used to build and protect, for sure, but it can also be used to divide and to destroy. And the key thing to remember, the outcome is not a given. See, identity itself isn't inherently good or bad. It's more useful to think of it like a lens. It shapes how we see the world, how we see our community, and especially how we see others. In the end, it's the context and our own perceptions that really call the shots. All right, so first, let's look at the good side of that plate. When it's harnessed for good, a shared identity can be the actual bedrock of a strong, peaceful community. And what's cool is how these things all feed into each other. When people feel a real sense of shared identity, they just naturally trust each other more. And that trust leads to mutual support, which makes it way easier to tackle big problems together. And all of that adds up to a society that's genuinely tight-knit. Yeah, and one of the sources we looked at puts it perfectly. When you feel like you're part of something bigger than just yourself, you have a real stake in its success. You're invested in keeping the peace because the group's success feels like your success. And this right here, this is so, so important. In times of crisis, like a natural disaster or an economic crash, that feeling of we're all in this together is the glue that holds a community together. It stops society from falling apart under pressure and helps people ride out the storm together. Right. So that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? If identity can build these amazing, resilient communities, what on earth flips that switch and turns it into a driver of hatred and violence? Okay, now we have to look at the other, much sharper edge of that sword. This is where the simple act of creating an us also creates a very dangerous them. And at the absolute heart of this problem is a pretty basic psychological idea. The moment we define who is in our group, we are, by definition, also deciding who is out. And that boundary, even if it seems harmless, can totally become this breeding ground for mistrust, for prejudice, and just fear of the unknown. And what's really scary is how that mistrust can escalate. It often follows this chillingly predictable path. First, small differences get blown way out of proportion and turned into threats. Then, leaders mobilize people against this so-called other. And the final devastating step is dehumanization, where the outgroup is seen as less than human, making violence seem not just possible, but justified. Now you throw real-world competition into this mix, and things get explosive. When groups are actually fighting over things like scarce jobs or land or political power, identity becomes this incredibly potent weapon to rally support and justify being aggressive. Suddenly, the fight isn't even about the resources anymore. It becomes all about us versus them. Okay, so we've got these two paths, right? Cooperation or conflict. What is it that actually tips the scales one way or the other? Well, it's not random. Turns out there are some very specific factors at play. And boom, here it is. This is really the key to this whole puzzle. Whether we end up with peace or conflict often boils down to these four critical things: how we define our identity, how strong our institutions are, the kind of leaders we follow, and how fairly resources are shared. Let's quickly break each of these down. So, factor number one, inclusivity. Is your group's identity built on shared values that anyone can be a part of, like a civic identity? Or is it based on something exclusive, like a specific ethnicity or religion you have to be born into? The first one builds bridges, the second one just builds walls. It's that simple. Second, institutions. Do you have strong, fair systems like courts and governments that can handle disputes impartially? When people trust the system, they don't have to fall back on their group for protection. But when those institutions are weak or corrupt, well, then your group's loyalty becomes the only thing you can count on. Number 3, and this one is just massive, leadership. Do leaders talk about what everyone has in common, or do they use fear and blame to pit groups against each other just to score political points? The words coming from the top can either be like water on a flame, or they can be pure gasoline. And last but not least, factor 4, resources. When there's a general sense that things are fair, that there's opportunity for everybody, people tend to chill out about identity stuff. But when things are scarce and unequal, that us versus them thinking comes roaring back. So, where does all this leave us? What's the big takeaway here? It's that we're not just passengers on this ride. The outcome isn't written in stone. The power really is in our choices and in how we decide to build the identity of our groups. Look, at the end of the day, group identity is just a tool, a really powerful, double-edged tool. But its impact is shaped by the choices we all make as a society, the leaders we listen to, the fairness of our systems, and maybe most importantly, the very stories we tell ourselves about who we actually are. And that, right there, is the thing to remember. We can't not have identities. It's just part of being human. The real work, the real challenge for every single one of us is to choose to build identities that are inclusive, that are compassionate, and that are strong enough to unite us, instead of tearing us apart.